Here's to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Hello, hello, all those beautiful faces. How we doing? How we doing? Stephanie checking in with another episode of Class Disruption. And today we're talking about Trump's Constitution Day speech and the executive order for the 1776 Commission. But before we get into it, I need you to smash that like button. If you're new here, I love your beautiful face. Welcome. Hit that subscribe button and that bell so you can get notified every time I drop a video. And let me know in those comments down below, where are you checking in from? How is the start to your new school year? And how are you processing all of these events that the writers of the 2020 season just keep throwing at us? And of course, I need you to share this video. That is the most important thing that you can do so we can spread this disruption to a class near you. I want to open up by saying rest in peace to Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I think that no matter what your personal political perspectives were on the decision she made as a Supreme Court justice or before that in her career, we can all agree that she's an icon, had a huge impact, and we can respect her for her legacy and for her dedication to America. But I can't help but keep thinking to myself, is this it? Is this going to be that moment that the history books point back to as that shot heard around the world? Right? There's been a few situations where I've asked myself that. Right? The Rittenhouse thing in Kenosha, and then a few days later in Portland, there was another shooting incident. And now this, Ruth Bader Ginsburg passes away. I think we're like 40 something days out from a very contentious election that could possibly come down to a Supreme Court decision trying to work out who the winner is. It's just the writers of this 2020 season, they are throwing it at us. And I just keep asking myself, like, is this it? Have we gotten to a place where this divide is untenable and we're just gonna break down into civil war? And the media is just so gross. It's so disheartening to see the way that they are just so obviously pushing one narrative, right? And I say this as a person who has never had any investment in either the Democratic or Republican, this standard notion of American politics, like the two-party system. I've been unaffiliated. Like I don't play these party politics games. I vote my conscience. I remember in college, I was part of the Libertarian Club, which when I became the president of it, I opened it up. Like we were trying to get more membership, and so I opened it up to be the alternative political society. So anybody who considers themselves outside of this mainstream, and we did events with everybody from the Free Press, who's like super far lefty, to the college Republicans, the college Dems, to fraternities, sororities. We did events with everybody. We just wanted to make sure that we were capturing the totality of American political views. And there isn't just Republicans and Democrats. And to that end, I was also part of this initiative called No Labels. It was around 2010, and the idea was we need to stop this, Republican Democrat and pick people from the center who are willing to work across the aisles to come up with solutions that actually work for the American people and actually representative of this large chunk of American people who really are in the middle. But right now we're being pulled to these fringes. And so I say that to say this, what I've always been fighting for is unity. And what the media is doing right now is not unifying in any way. They are pushing one single narrative so much. And maybe they think that's right, but by not creating an arena where people can come together and discuss all ideas, not only ideas that are deemed acceptable within this small window, that's the issue. We need to make room for all these ideas, because no matter where we believe the answer lies in solving these problems, we can all at least agree on the American values of liberalism, that all men were created equal and we have certain inalienable rights that we were born with, chief among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So again, we might not agree on how to solve these problems, but we can at least agree on these fundamental values. Now, have we lived up to that? No. No, that is a part of our history. And are we living up to them in 2020? No, it is clear that many people don't have access, particularly to that pursuit of happiness. And that is a big, important part of the American story. And that's why we need these Enlightenment liberal values to be able to sort this out, to be able to come together and have a nuanced discussion, a complicated discussion, and acknowledge that there are two sides of this. That yes, on the one hand, America's sin, right? Its original sin was slavery, and an obvious hypocrisy to those stated fundamental values. But those stated fundamental values were revolutionary, absolutely radical for that time period. Neither side is really fully right or fully wrong. Their big problem is that they're unwilling to acknowledge the narrative of the other side and figure out how we can intertwine those together, because they both have aspects that are important. But by denying the legitimacy of the other to exist at all, that's where we're running into the problem. Which brings us to today's video. We are going to watch and react to President Donald Trump's Constitution Day speech. So that was September 17th, 2020 at the White House Conference on American History, I think. And he signed an executive order to promote a patriotic education through something called the 1776 Commission. And it was a direct retort towards the New York Times 1619 Project. And immediately on Twitter, on the other social media platforms, on the mainstream media, everybody starts freaking out, going nuts, talking about the F word, fascism, all over the place. So with the risk of being called racist or being accused of being a white supremacist, which is an increasingly common experience for me these days, my short answer is yes. I do believe that we should have a patriotic education, that we should be teaching kids to love America and that it is an exceptional place. However, of course, I'm not gonna leave it there. And I urge you, if you had that inclination to say no where I said yes, just be willing to get past that, right? We have to be willing to get past that initial roadblock of that politicized language, of those hashtags, defund the police, hashtag Black Lives Matter, hashtag all lives matter, right? We have to be willing to take a step past that and have that more nuanced discussion, speaking to each other's hearts, to each other's minds as Americans first, and all these other things after that. Because it truly is, when you show the most humanity in the face of hate, that hate simply cannot stand up. So come with me, engage. Let's be humans. Let's save America. And I mean that, literally. It's up to us. We must save our country from disintegrating into this madness. So here's a playback of Trump's speech. We're gonna go through it, start and stop it, and I'll give you my opinion, my reaction.
I'm truly honored to be here at the very first White House conference on American history. So important.
So as he noted, this is the first one of these events ever. And I think that in particular makes it really easy to point to these kind of broad statements that he makes in very Trumpian form. Everything's great, everything's awesome, these superlatives. And then try to frame it within this fascist box. Oh, he's tried to create a Hitler Youth. And I think that this is what really makes democracy so hard. It is constantly riding that line between freedom and law and order and fascism, and stepping over that line. But I think at the same time, he is pointing to a real issue that's going on in America right now. It's not like he's just coming out and saying this. Like, there's definitely some sort of culture war going on, some sort of discussion, if you can call it that, going on about what is the legacy of our founding? How are we going to remember that? So I think when you bring that context into it, that starts to bring a lot more nuance to what he's saying, and it's not as easy to just be like, oh, he's trying to create a Hitler Youth and indoctrinate our children. Because honestly, as somebody who grew up in the public school system and then went to school to become a teacher, between when I was in school and now, I do see a lot of things that I might consider indoctrination, but it's definitely not from what you might identify as Donald Trump. It's coming from the other side.
The American character. We must clear away the twisted web of lies in our schools and classrooms and teach our children the magnificent truth about our country. We want our sons and daughters to know that they are the citizens of the most exceptional nation in the history of the world.
Okay, so I know I only played like another line, but a lot of people are going to take issue with this idea of American exceptionalism. And this is where I agree with those pushbacks, is we don't want to caricature America as freedom and justice and this amazing, perfect place that's exceptional in every way, always. I think more accurately, what this term exceptionalism gets to is America was indeed the first of its kind. This idea that rather than being ruled by a king and relying on these more tribal connections of clans and families, that we look to a greater value that is not in your religion, that is not in your race, and that is connected to these certain ideals, which, as I was quoting from the Declaration of Independence from before, are encapsulated in that document. And like I said, no, we have not lived up to that ideal, to that perfection of our union. But we've made so much progress, especially, you gotta put this into historical context, right? 250 some odd years we've been established as a country. And look how far we've come in that time compared to all of history. How long did it take, man, to just start to settle down and create civilizations? And then it was another 10,000 years. It's, we really have to start looking at the progress we've made instead of looking at the progress necessarily that we haven't made. Of course, we need to keep note of that so we can keep making that progress. But it needs to be within that context of like, whoa, like in my lifetime, in a generation. Look how much we've changed in a generation. People were not able to go to the same schools, drink from the same water fountains. And look at now, like, look at my son. Beautiful, beautiful young man made from a black person and a white person. And it's just like, nobody has any issue with that. Sometimes whenever we get a look here or there, but that's beautiful. All right, I might have gone off on a tangent. Let's keep going.
To grow up in America is to live in a land where anything is possible.
We have to believe in that. We have to, that's what we need to be teaching our kids. Yes, we have to teach them all about the past and the history, how we got to this moment in time, but that needs to be the thrust, and that's what I'm focusing on with my son. You can do anything.
All because of the immortal principles of our nation's founders, inscribed nearly 2.5 centuries ago. That's why we've come to the National Archives, the sacred home of our national memory. In this great chamber, we preserve our glorious inheritance, the Declaration of Independence.
Right? And that, I think that all can be true, with also it being true that founding was flawed. That there are many aspects of our society today that are flawed. But what we've been handed in the actual essence of the Constitution, of that Declaration of Independence, that is the American spirit. And that is the thing that's going to allow us to overcome that flaw. And we need that nuance and that framework to make sure that we're teaching to our kids. And it should be bent in the direction of like, yo, America is awesome. And not in this direction that the first message is, oh, there's all these structural things that are working against you, and not until these change can you be anything. No, it's gotta be the other way around. It's gotta be you can be anything. And in so doing that, you are going to help us overcome all these things over here that are structurally and historically flawed.
The Constitution, the Bill of Rights, on this very day in 1787, our founding fathers signed the Constitution at Independence Hall in Philadelphia. It was the fulfillment of 1,000 years of Western civilization.
You see, 1,000 years to get to that point. 1,000 years. And it's only been how many since 1776? And look how far we've come in that time, more towards fulfilling that promise. Have we fulfilled it? No, I don't think that we ever will. But we are always in pursuit of the more perfect union. And that is what we need to focus on first and foremost.
Our Constitution was the product of centuries of tradition, wisdom, and experience. No political document has done more to advance the human condition or propel the engine of progress. Yet as we...
And I would love an argument against that. Let me know in those comments down below. Do you think that there is another document throughout history that was impactful as this? I guess the only argument that I can come up with is the Bible, like the 10 Commandments, the Quran, these big founding documents that historically informed the Constitution. And I would say the Constitution is in that line. So let me know in those comments down below if you think that there's any other document that has been as pivotal for bringing us to this point in our journey as the Constitution.
Gather this afternoon, a radical movement is attempting to demolish this treasured and precious inheritance.
And I just need to stop it there too, because AOC was on Instagram Live to like 1.5 million people the other day, calling for the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg to radicalize people. And this is an issue because right now we need to not be radicalizing. We need to be maybe activating. Like I want to give her the benefit of the doubt and perhaps she would just think, oh, this should activate us to get politically involved. But it's not about radicalizing. It's about coming to the center and meeting at these values that we hold to be true and self-evident.
We can't let that happen. Left-wing mobs have torn down statues of our founders, desecrated our memorials, and carried out a campaign of violence and anarchy. Far-left demonstrators have chanted the words, "America was never great." The left has launched a vicious and violent assault on law enforcement, the universal symbol of the rule of law in America. These radicals have been aided and abetted by liberal politicians, establishment media, and even large corporations.
And now you might have a different overall conception of what's been happening in the streets of America since the death of George Floyd. But there is no denying that there's a very radical left element marching in the street with things like "Death to America" or "End America." And that's concerning.
Whether it is the mob on the street or the cancel culture in the boardroom, the goal is the same: to silence dissent, to scare you out of speaking the truth, and to bully Americans into abandoning their values, their heritage, and their very way of life.
And I agree with basically all that. If you don't think that common people are not scared to speak their mind, then your group is way too small. You are not reaching outside your bubble, because people aren't. They're keeping their opinions to themselves. And that's really an aspect of what class disruption is about. It has the, you know, as a teacher, it has the obvious connotation of being that kid in class that's disrupting and embracing that. But it also is about saying that thing that other people want to say but might not say. First and foremost, specifically in the context of education, but also in these broader senses. This is obviously pretty related to education, but in a tangential sense, and we're getting quite political here. But you know, I have myself, before I make these videos, I always reflect on it, and then I tell myself that if I don't, that's part of the problem. And I'm coming forward in good faith. I'm coming forward trying to have a conversation, and I'm always open and willing, and I'm not here to make personal attacks on anybody. So frame it how you want, but I believe that what I'm engaging in is an honest conversation with liberal values, and I'm willing to hear other perspectives, even if they seem way, way far different than me. Let's sort it out. And I call on my fellow educators, I call on every citizen in America to likewise do the same. Like I said in the beginning, it's that humanity, that pure, authentic humanity that will overcome hate no matter what. It just can't stand up to it, right? Maintain that humanity no matter what. And even if it doesn't feel like it in the moment, when you're by yourself, if you could sit by yourself in your room and be good with yourself, that's what matters. And I go to sleep every single night so content in my heart with my love for America.
We are here today to declare that we will never submit to tyranny. We will reclaim our history and our country for citizens of every race, color, religion, and creed. The radicals burning American flags want to burn down the principles enshrined in our founding documents, including the bedrock principle of equal justice under law.
It's true. Look what they're trying to do in California. Trying to make it so that they remove that equality principle and they can legally discriminate to achieve equity.
In order to radically transform America, they must first cause Americans to lose confidence in who we are, where we came from, and what we believe. As I said at Mount Rushmore, which they would love to rip down and rip it down fast, that's never going to happen. 2 months ago, the left-wing cultural revolution is designed to overthrow the American Revolution.
Listen, if you don't know a lot about the Cultural Revolution, I really highly suggest reading some books on it. Matter of fact, let me go grab a book I suggest. Super easy read. It's a young adult novel. Let me go grab it. It's called Red Scarf Girl by Jiang. And it's really good, a super fast read, and it's something that I plan to use when I study the Cultural Revolution with my 10th graders. But you have to read up on your history. You have to understand that there are forces at play here that are really trying. Sometimes I feel like I don't have the language to say it. It's not, my main focus is making my lessons and teaching all day. And so really what encapsulates my thoughts on this topic is a conversation between Joe Rogan and Murray. I forget his first name. But you should go check it out. It just was on last week, and they really talk about how this functions to undermine a society and make it forget itself. And it has a lot to do with this postmodern ideology. It's CRT, critical race theory, is also based on postmodern theory to an extent. And it's specifically the part of postmodern theory that denies objective reality. It's everything is subjective. And so, and that's the issue, really, right? Because whereas liberalism and what I would argue is the fundamental values of the United States says, okay, there is some objective reality and we can agree on some sort of common experience. Now, of course, there's a subjective element to everything that we do, but there is some objective place out there and we can measure it. Whereas postmodernism is like, there's no objective reality. It's all about lived experience, and it's all about, you can see it in things like 2 + 2 = 5, right? And they use all these words about how, well, that's a Western and that. They just play, and that's why semantics is always such a big issue, where we're talking about I don't see color versus you have to see color. I always come back to that. I think it's a really good example of the semantic games that prevent us from like getting to the actual issue. So let's keep going.
As many of you testified today, the left-wing rioting and mayhem are the direct result of decades of left-wing indoctrination in our schools. It's gone on far too long.
And to that end, another thing that you should go check out is the documentary about Evergreen State University. It's a university, small little college up in Washington State, and in 2017, they had basically a small version of what's happening in the United States as a whole now. And everybody's like, oh, that's just, a campus thing at some small liberal arts funky college there. And now what do we see? We see it seeping out. So that's another thing you should go check out. It's a 3-part series on the Evergreen State University meltdown, basically.
Our children are instructed from propaganda tracks like those of Howard Zinn that try to make students ashamed of their own history. The left has warped, distorted, and defiled the American story.
All right, I need to admittedly get up on my Howard Zinn. I've seen quotes out there, both quotes that I can get on with and agree with, and ones that I'm like, I need more context. So for the sake of understanding the situation at an even deeper level, especially as a history teacher, I'm definitely gonna get my hands on some Howard Zinn. I've heard things going both directions.
With deceptions, falsehoods, and lies, there is no better example than the New York Times totally discredited 1619 Project.
All right, so like I said, we are going to be getting more into this 1619 Project thing. And I haven't read the whole 1619 Project, but I read the main article by Nikole Hannah-Jones, and I read a few other pieces that were from the series. And in many ways, I like it. I enjoyed that style of writing, this way of weaving kind of personal narrative into history. It's something that as a history teacher, I find is a very useful tool for getting my students into writing, right? Before we get into, okay, you're going to write about this historical event and analyze it, I have them start with writing about themselves and then writing about themselves within a certain historical context. And then we jump over to that more straight academic essay writing, analyzing documents. And what I'm going to do in my class this year is I want to use the 1619 Project, but I'm going to try to balance it out by having something from the 1776 Project, and try to at least present it in a more nuanced context and at least give them some notion of this culture war that's happening that when I was a teenager, there's no way that I would have been on that level to understand that. Even being somewhat interested in politics, I feel like the kids are pretty much not really aware of this culture war that's happening on a much higher and intense level. They have lots of other teenage things going on. But I wanted to pull up this tweet from Nikole Hannah-Jones where I think that the 1619 Project goes wrong. And it's what I see happening a lot on the left. I also see it happen on the right. That's not to say that it doesn't happen on this, like, the far right. But like I said, the left is the one that has power and is taking over a more mainstream block, whereas the right is really pretty much staying more over there. So let me pull that tweet up. So this tweet right here from Brett Weinstein gets to what the left often does. It's kind of like a Trojan horse. On its face, I want to be down with the 1619 Project and what it's trying to achieve, but it's what they're doing on that underneath level and sneaking in at the same time while trying to claim that they're not.
we see it a lot with the defund the police or the abolish the police, as this hashtag, and then they're like, whoa, like that's not really what it is, but maybe it is what it is. And it's really hard to point when they're like, oh wait, that's not what we're saying, but they're at the same time like pushing on the radical elements. And so originally Nicole Hannon-Jones had put out this tweet. It's not any longer available. And when I went to go to her profile to see, like maybe she had just blocked Brett, none of her tweets will load past 17 hours ago. So I'm not really sure what's up with that, if it's my computer or if it's something they did. But I do remember the tweet here was talking about how she feels like the right is trying to misframe what they were doing with the 1619 Project. And I think that she has a point here, but at the same time, I don't think she's being fully honest with what she's trying to achieve either. Because as Brett points out, the true origin of this framing of the 1619 Project may come not from the right, but from your own Twitter banner. And then you can see that her Twitter banner right here has July 4th, 1776 crossed out, and then August 20th, 1619 is being suggested as the true founding of our nation.
And what that does is that takes the heart and soul of this country as being about those ideals expressed in the Declaration of Independence and makes it about slavery. And again, I'm not trying to deny slavery and all the ills and the sin that is and the shame that it has on our legacy. But again, that's not what the ideals are that make up America. And it's been these ideals that have been allowed us to overcome and to continue to hopefully overcome these sins, these racists, this supremacy, this sexism, all these isms that we don't like in a free society. And then he continues on.
But you clearly know that. This old tweet makes 1, the intent of the 1619 Project clear, 2, the source of this framing, and 3, your Twitter banner evidence of the connection, which raises the question about your new tweet, which falsely argues the right distorted the meaning. So I argue that 1619 is our true founding. Also, look at the banner in my pic profile. How can your misportrayal be reconciled with your obligations as a journalist?
And so this really well explains my view of what's happening in the mainstream. I really see as the left is going so far left and making these radical claims and then be like, oh, we're being misframed by the right. And then they project on to the right, which again, I have no loyalty to the Republicans or to Trump. And you see hints of this in people's uber loyalty to Trump, but it's at least honest. This is dishonest what they're doing over here. And that's always really been my thing. Yeah, Trump sucks and it's crazy that he got elected, but at least the Republicans let him get elected, right? The Republicans didn't let Bernie twice they cheated to play him. So which one is more insidious? You tell me. I think that was a little side journey we made from the video. Let's go back to the video and see if we can finish this up here. Oh, we still got a ways to go, but I'm having a good time. I hope you are too.
This project rewrites American history to teach our children that we were founded on the principle of oppression, not freedom.
That's what I was saying right there. We were founded on freedom. It was a flawed freedom. There was oppression. Despite that, there was hypocrisy. But that was not the founding principle. It was not founded in oppression.
Nothing could be further from the truth. America's founding set in motion the unstoppable chain of events that abolished slavery, secured civil rights, defeated communism and fascism, and built the most fair, equal, and prosperous nation in human history.
I mean, show me the lie, though. There's an argument to be made about the prosperity. Again, I said it's very obvious. And I think that's more so what this is, that people aren't able to access that American dream, that exceptionalism, especially in this time. I mean, really been since 2008.
And there's issues, and we need to address those issues. And you can argue, oh, Europe does it better with their more socialized system. And I'm open to those arguments. But I would also say that just the mere fact that we have 320 million some odd people, that just means that, versus these countries in Europe that have a few million, or Germany is one of the bigger ones that has 80 million. When you have 1% of their population that's not doing so well, not able to access that dream, versus our population, the numbers just multiply. So I think to an extent it's a numbers game, but I also do think that there's like some deep flawed structural issues, especially around corporatism, that we have that might be in better control in other places. But again, I'm not necessarily so convinced on everything being as socialized as it is in Europe either. So, but I think that's like a fair place for the conversation to be. Like, we can have both sides, and I think it's actually ultimately necessary to have both sides of that conversation to find that best solution. But there's nothing fundamentally wrong with having a love for your country and a love for those founding ideals. And it is because of that love that you can then turn around and have that nuanced discussion and make those criticisms and say to the White House.
The narratives about America being pushed by the far left and being chanted in the streets bear a striking resemblance to the anti-American propaganda of our adversaries, because both groups want to see America weakened, derided, and totally diminished. Students in our universities are inundated with critical race theory.
I already touched on what I think my issue with critical race theory is. With a lot of these things, I think there are some great ideas. I'm all for justice. I'm all for equality. I'm all for anti-racism, or not being racist, which apparently isn't the same thing. But because it's glued together with this postmodernism that everything is subjective and about lived experience, as a whole, it does not work together for me. And I do think it's part of the reason that we're seeing such disintegration. When you break people down into these identity groups and basically play them against each other for power, it essentially goes back to what we undid with the American founding. Right? America was about, okay, rising above to these higher principles. We might be all different in these other ways, but we can agree on this. And this is trying to bring us back to that identitarianism.
This is a Marxist doctrine, holding that America is a wicked and racist nation, that even young children are complicit in oppression, and that our entire society must be radically transformed. Critical race theory is being forced into our children's schools. It's being imposed into workplace trainings, and it's being deployed to rip apart friends.
It's time to socially distance Nancy Pelosi from Congress. I'm Big Dan Rodarmer, former WWE pro wrestler running for Congress.
Neighbors and families. A perfect example of critical race theory was recently published by the Smithsonian Institution. This document alleged that concepts such as hard work, rational thinking, and the nuclear family and belief in God were not values that unite all Americans, but were instead aspects of whiteness.
And if you missed that one, I'll throw it up right here for you real quick. Now, when I first read this, I thought this was written by white supremacists. It's one of the most racist things I've ever seen. And yet, this is anti-racism here, folks. So, whether or not you like the president, you agree with exactly how he's putting everything, I would find it very hard to invalidate these points. And you have to realize this is how regular people are thinking, whether they're saying it or not. Right? There's a lot of performative stuff going on out here. There's a lot of people just trying to go out there so people don't come at them. They're protecting themselves, and they're cowards.
This is offensive and outrageous to Americans of every ethnicity, and it's especially harmful to children of minority backgrounds who should be uplifted, not disparaged. Teaching this horrible doctrine to our children is a form of child abuse in the truest sense of those words. For many years now, the radicals have mistaken Americans' silence for weakness, but they're wrong. There is no more powerful force than a parent's love for their children, and patriotic moms and dads are going to demand that their children are no longer fed hateful lies about this country.
And so I don't know if I would use the term child abuse necessarily, because I think that a lot of people are doing this because they think it's the right thing to do. They think it's what like a nice white parent should be doing. But he's right about the schools. Look at the homeschooling numbers. And you can say, oh, well, it's a temporary thing. But if you look at the larger trend, that this is just something I think that's opening the floodgates. I think we're going to see a lot more people going to alternative options, whether it's homeschooling, whether it's pods, whether it's micro schools, independent schools, charter schools. People are looking for other options.
American parents are not going to accept indoctrination in our schools, cancel culture in our work, or the repression of traditional faith, culture, and values in the public square. Not anymore.
And that's why I'm sitting here making this video today. We can't be silent. We can't be that silent majority. We have to come out, we have to speak our minds, and we can't be scared.
We embrace the vision of Martin Luther King, where children are not judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. The left is attempting to destroy that beautiful vision and divide Americans by race in the service of political power.
Does that sound like a fascist to you? He's talking about judging people based on the content of their character. He's talking about judging everybody by the same standard, not coming up with different standards and saying, hey, we want you to wear this mark so that we know that you're a black-owned business, right? I mean, you know, in the way it's being context, it seems like it might be a good thing, but when you look at it the other way, it's almost like saying wear a star. Who's the fascist? Or who has the more fascist-like tendencies?
By viewing every issue through the lens of race, they want to impose a new segregation, and we must not allow that to happen.
Right? We see these affinity groups. We saw in a college, they made a whites-only cafe. And they had a time when only blacks could be in there and whites could be in there. Is that the society that we're trying to make? Is that what we're trying to go more towards?
Critical race theory, the 1619 Project, and the crusade against American history is toxic propaganda, ideological poison that, if not removed, will dissolve the civic bonds that tie us together.
Oh my goodness, I wish that I taught U.S. history so badly. But that's okay. In Global this year, we are going to do so much crossover. We are using those current events to really look back into history and contextualize and understand what's going on right now. We're going to do a whole unit on the election. I've already come up with a way to team up with my senior teacher. She teaches the 12th grade, and they're taking government in the fall. So we're going to team up and do a unit together and have the seniors come to my class, have the sophomores go to her class. It's going to be awesome.
Will destroy our country. That is why I recently banned trainings in this prejudiced ideology from the federal government and banned it in the strongest manner possible.
Now, I'm not a fan of the federal government banning things, but this isn't like him saying like nobody anywhere can take this training. This is specifically for the federal government. So it'd be kind of like a business saying, okay, my business, we're not going to do this thing. So it's just for the federal government. He's not trying to supersede his executive power. He has this authority. And to be honest, I agree with him. If you've ever been to one of those trainings, they are, again, it's not that they don't have like a valid base that they're starting off of, it's where they go with that. And it just...
The only path to national unity is through our shared identity as Americans. That is why it is so urgent that we finally restore patriotic education to our schools. Under our leadership, the National Endowment for the Humanities has awarded a grant to support the development of a pro-American curriculum that celebrates the truth about our nation's great history.
Okay, so now if you only see that clip, which this is one of the more popular clips, like when I was looking for the full thing here, it was really hard to find. Most of the clips were just a few clips, and this is one of the parts they clipped off. Now, if you hear just that part without all this context that he used to define what he means by the truth or a patriotic education, then I think it's super easy to frame that as, oh, he's a fascist. He wants America to have this mythical history, and we're going to indoctrinate our children with this so they just think America's the best, and they have no nuanced understanding of the pain and suffering of a huge portion of the population for basically the entirety of our founding, except for perhaps the last 30, 40, 50 years. And we can all agree that we have not resolved all of those issues. And again, that there is still issues of access to all of our rights and that pursuit of happiness. But if you just hear that clip, you get none of that nuance. You get none of that understanding. And that's why I need you guys to do the due diligence. I need you to go watch the whole things, and I need you to remove yourself from this distaste. If you listen to Trump at double speed, it doesn't sound nearly as bad as when he does this like long drawn out. Matter of fact, I'm gonna change it to double time, and we'll listen to just this next little bit in it, and you'll see what I mean. But remove yourself from that emotion of not liking the man, right? Because we can all agree on that, and just try to listen to the actual content and the merit of the arguments, and let's have that conversation. So hold on, let me play this on double speed. Where is it?
Involved in this project, including Professor Wilfred McClay. Wilfred, please, thank you very much. Thank you. Dr. Peter Wood of the National Association of Scholars. Dr. Peter. Thank you, thank you. And Ted Rebarber. Thank you, Ted. Thank you very much, Ted.
Okay, so you see when he speaks it, when you speed him up a little bit, he doesn't sound like that ridiculous way that he sounds normally. And he just named 3 professors. I want to look more into them and do some research on what they've previously published, what their stances are. So I'm going to look more into them, and we'll keep doing follow-ups on this commission and the continuing culture wars.
So pleased to announce that I will soon sign an executive order establishing a national commission to promote patriotic education. It will be called the 1776 Commission. It will encourage our educators to teach our children about the miracle of American history and make plans to honor the 250th anniversary of our founding. Think of that, 250 years.
And we should celebrate that, and we don't need to put air quotes around founders to appreciate the complexity and the hypocrisy in many moments of what they did. But we can also recognize, again, that those founding values of freedom and justice are what actually allow us to conceive of all these social justice initiatives anyways, and that all this radical stuff actually gets away from the heart of what we're trying to do.
Recently, I also signed an executive order to establish the National Garden.
Okay, so we're gonna skip over this part. He tells a story about a founder. His name is Caesar McCoy, and he was at the Constitutional Convention, and he rode his horse to go cast his vote, and he had a statue in Wilmington, Delaware, and the statue was recently torn down. Biden, who's actually from Delaware, has not acknowledged that, and Trump is saying, that's not cool of him. And what we're gonna do is put up a statue in the Garden of American Heroes. He also is having an executive order to give automatic 10 years to anybody who pulls down a statue without permission. So I just don't think it's super relevant to go through that whole story. There's one little last clip I want to play before we wrap it on up.
From Washington to Lincoln, from Jefferson to King, America has been home to some of the most incredible people who have ever lived. With the help of everyone here today, the legacy of 1776 will never be erased. Our heroes will never be forgotten. Our youth will be taught to love America with all of their heart.
And so again, it's clips like that. When you hear that, it's super easy to reframe that in this Hitler Youth fascism framework. But when you hear the buildup of how he's defining all of those things, this is just the conclusion, rehashing his major points. He doesn't need to redefine them every single moment he says them. The listener needs to have context. And it is very irresponsible of the media to not provide that context and to totally reframe and recontextualize things to drive their narrative. And that's what I cannot stand. I cannot stand that we're just driving this narrative, and no matter what, it's just Trump bad, Trump bad, Trump bad. As a normal person who has no investment in either side, it totally repulses me from that one side. Now, I'm Unity 2020 all day. I'm going to continue to advocate for them, go to their events. I'm going to continue to endorse Tulsi and Crenshaw, the candidates who members of Unity 2020 nominated, and going full force with that all the way to the end. But before we end this episode, I just really want to show you an example of how I see the left taking really everything that Trump does, but specifically this speech here that we just went through, and is putting it in and reframing it into this totally different context, making it fascist or racist. And so let's check out this thread based on a tweet put out by Ibram X. Kendi. They're saying it's a racist education. Of course, everything to Ibram X. Kendi is racist, so this isn't necessarily surprising. But what I really wanted to show was this reply right here. We've been here before. The Nazis tried it. For the love of America, let's not go there again. So you can love America, but Donald Trump's patriotism isn't right. And so then she puts in this clip. It says, another way in which the Nazis aimed to indoctrinate the younger population was through reforming the education system. So she's trying to say Donald Trump's patriotic education is a reforming of the education in the way that the Nazis did it. And the Nazis aimed to de-intellectualize education. They did not want education to provoke people to ask questions or to think for themselves, which I would argue is the opposite of how Donald Trump defined education. He defined it in the tradition of liberalism and the Enlightenment, which is all about asking questions, thinking for yourself and the individual, right? And your rights. They believed this approach would instill obedience and belief in the Nazi worldview, creating the ideal future generation. So I do believe that it's a goal that we want to instill a belief, not obedience. That's opposite, class disruption. We don't want obedience, but he is trying to instill like an American worldview, and American representing this liberalism, these Enlightenment values, to hopefully one day, maybe not ideal, but to get to that more perfect realization of our union. The Nazis first focused on changing what students learned. And this is the part that gets me, because this is exactly what I'm seeing happen actually from the left, right? From the Ibram X. Kendi side, right? The left is arguing all these things that it wants to redefine the way that we're defining racism. It wants to redefine the way that we're defining sex and gender. It wants to redefine how we think about race. It wants to redefine all these things. They wanted to emphasize sports, history, and racial science. Again, racial science. Which side is pushing that racial science, the racial categorization and this monolithic conception of white and black? And here's another example. Yes, American history is a story of racists, murderers, and thieves. This country will never be free of white supremacy until we burn every library and every history book in our struggle for freedom. Burn history. That's what they want us to do. Isn't that exactly what we were who's anti-intellectual, huh? Who's anti-intellectual? Is the person who wants to reaffirm certain founding values and put them within this liberal context, or is it the people that want to burn something down? We're just gonna leave that one here. You could go check out this thread on your own if you want to see some disturbing stuff. So that was perhaps a little bit longer of a video than I had anticipated, but these issues, they really get me riled up, especially as a history teacher. I felt like I had to come in here, put in my 2 cents, and I know this is inevitably going to be taken in the wrong way by some people. I'm going to be framed as a Trump supporter. I'm going to be framed as a racist or a white supremacist, but again, that's okay with me because I'm very comfortable with myself. I know myself, and I invite you, you can see what I do on my social media. Go to Class Disruption, follow me there on Instagram, on Twitter. Check out what I do in my classroom at Making History with Miss Edmonds with my kids. That's a little window into my life, but of course it is not the full context. Every day in and out, I'm in it for my community, for my people. I'm on the ground. And so again, you can try to frame me however you want, but you don't live my life. You don't know what I do for my people. And I invite you, if you want, to come find out, because I think that you might be very shocked and surprised what you see. And again, I'm saying this over and over. It's become a theme in my videos that rather than focus on the language that can be often seen as being political and having connotations beyond what a person might be saying, let's look at those actions and let's look at the solutions that we're putting forth. So again, in the beginning, I said, even if you were inclined to say no, where I said yes to a patriotic education, I hope that by going through it and really breaking it down, we have been at least able to establish some common ground to continue having this conversation as Americans, as humans, fighting for the unity of this country rather than falling further into this disintegration. So definitely let me know in those comments down below where we stand now at the end of this video. I'm definitely all 100% down for engaging in arguments that are opposing, arguments that might be similar to mine but coming from a different angle. Like, let's get into it. That is what Class Disruption is all about. It's coming out, speaking your mind, and trying to really disrupt that status quo, which unfortunately that status quo right now seems to be highly, highly radical, or at least the movements to maintain the status quo. So it is crazy times, but I need you to still smash that like button. If you're new here, I know this was a very heavy topic, but that does not mean that I do not love your beautiful face, because I love that beautiful face. It is so beautiful. It is such a beautiful day to love America. You know I had to do it. So I need you to smash that subscribe button, hit that bell so you can get notified every time I drop a video, and I need you to share this video so we can spread the disruption to a class near you. And until next time, please, let's do ourselves all a favor. Go to a park, engage with a stranger, take notice of the beauty, be grateful and humble for living in such a prosperous and safe society for the most part, and stay foolish, y'all.